flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Can everybody hear me? Is this on? Is this on? That was me. Yeah, these are live. Everybody hear me? Oh, okay. We signed the payroll and manifest, quick claim deed. I need a motion for the chair to sign the disclosure of lobbying activities. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion the chair sign the lobbying activities disclosure.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Need a motion for the chair to sign the assurances for non-construction programs.
Motion the chair sign the disclosure of non-construction programs.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And then for the chair to sign the DHS certification regarding lobbying, debarment, and suspension. I can't read my writing. We can just do a so moved on that. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. Was there anything else in there, Karen, that needed to be signed?
I think you're all set.
Okay, great. Okay, we're going to be opening up our hearing for Sergeant Sullivan. Just a few housekeeping rules on that. The board has voted to allow Sergeant Sullivan's attorney to speak for 1 hour. Is that me?
I think it's me.
Okay. And then we will be moving on where the board will be asking questions. So seeing that said, I will turn it over to you, Attorney Vedrager. Is that the last name? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. So a few housekeeping items on my end, just for the record, first of all, we didn't receive any documents until 2 days after the scheduled hearing last week. So it wasn't that I didn't have time to review them, I hadn't received them. We have still not received a large amount of the documents that we requested, many of which are directly relevant to some of the key allegations against my client. And I have discussed this with Attorney Popper, but note my continuing objection to the withholding of all that wasn't even on the record. Do I need to repeat all of that?
1 moment. Oh, okay.
Test. Okay. Test. Oh, I'm going to knock that around. You know that, right?
It's like karaoke.
If it's this close, it's going to go down. That's good. Do I need to restate everything? Okay. So I don't remember where I started, but I didn't receive the documents at all until 2 days after last hearing. So I just wanted to clarify that. I have not received all the documents requested. Many of the documents that have been requested are still being withheld. Many which pertain to some of the key allegations against my client that are critical to his defense of these allegations. And I want to note my continuing objection to the withholding of that information that's necessary to disprove the allegations against my client. Attorney Popper and I have discussed it, but I'm noting my objection for the record.
Just for the record, are you done with records?
Well, I wanted to make sure that the board has received a copy of Attorney Estes' affidavit.
No, I forwarded it to the town administrator this afternoon. I just got it this afternoon,
Okay,
as you did.
as I did, yeah.
But as far as records are concerned, before the May 18th hearing, you were sent, I sent you all of the records that Chief Poirier had provided to me prior to that meeting. It wasn't 2 days after, it was before that hearing. In fact, several days before that hearing. Subsequent to May 18th, the chief sent me additional records that he wanted to rely upon, and I also forwarded those to you. I have not asked the town or gotten from the town all of the other records that you requested, such as all correspondence and everything to do with the file with them, to do with all of the events set forth in Chief Poirier's with respect to his documents. So there are things that you've asked for that we haven't provided, and we'll see if they're relevant.
When?
It depends on what the board does.
Well, I don't understand what you're, I mean.
You could, I mean, you make.
You're
So
saying-
anyway, I
you're
just
saying
wanted to
we'll see
say.
if they're relevant, but
What I'm saying is every document that Chief Poirier provided to me that he was going to be submitting, you have been provided.
I understood. I wasn't intending to imply that you, Attorney Puffer, are withholding anything personally, but we have requested, we've made many requests. And my reference to the 2 days after was at the last hearing, Chairwoman Bijou suggested that we were adjourning the hearing because I hadn't had a chance to review the documents, and I didn't think that was a fair representation for my client because I actually hadn't received anything yet of the request since the prior meeting. There were also requests from the first meeting, prior to the first meeting, that were still outstanding. So I'm acknowledge that we have disputes about what some of those documents are, but you just said something that is troubling to me, that we're going to determine at what later date whether or not they're relevant if this is the last night and my client is going to be denied time past 1 hour tonight.
Well, my statement speaks for itself.
Okay, well, then I object to a later determination of relevance after the hearing has been closed and my client has no longer has an opportunity to address these claims. My continuing objection to Chairwoman Bijou sitting on this panel, making decisions with regard to my client, Detective Sergeant Sullivan, stands. The meeting minutes that have been released did not address substantively what was in the MRI report at all. Actually, they directly indicate that the substance of what occurred was not included in the meeting minutes. And I think that's it for preliminaries, except I would like to include the Attorney Esty affidavit tonight. And because the town already had received a copy, I did not bring copies for all the board members.
I'll gladly go and make copies for you.
Yeah, you might as well make it part of the record.
Is it already by you? Yeah, I assume it's the same. I assume you want me to wait until.
That relates to just.
And I will carry making a copy of this lot going to that tax tax.
Thank you. I started to ask, but you were in a conversation. I didn't want to interrupt. I assume you do want us to wait until Ms. Montgomery returns.
Oh. Sure if this thing has to be turned in a different direction or the volume needs to be turned up. Can you read?
What's that?
Nice.
That one should be turned this way.
Sorry, I'm the one that needs to hear. Somebody count down?
Testing, testing.
Testing.
Test, 1, 2, test.
That's better.
Of course.
We have a couple moments to read them.
Yeah. I should also ask Attorney Pepper, the new allegation from the chief, dated June 8th, 2021. I don't want that to come up after I'm done with my hour. of
I'm sorry.
time.
Are there any new allegations?
There is a new allegation. The chief has submitted an 8-page violation against my client dated June 8th, 2021.
Oh, that's the one I sent you
Yeah.
last week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Has there been a decision on that? I don't want that to come up after I'm done with my time.
Has there been a decision on it?
Yes, is that going to be part of the evidence?
That's
the board
part of
aware
what the
of it?
chief wants to submit, yeah.
Okay, so does the board have copies of this also?
No.
No?
No, because at the time that the chief submitted it and I forwarded it to you, it was determined certainly to forward it to Mr. Sullivan's attorney. And you didn't know if it would be submitted as evidence or if the board would even address it at that time.
So it is going to be in evidence.
The chief sent it, I forwarded it to you. It may be, I don't know if the chief wants to rely upon that tonight or not.
Well, I think the board should have a copy of this as well. It's a long one though. It's 8 pages and there's a lot of attachments.
Does the board want to address this?
We don't know what it is.
Yeah. I don't know what it means.
I think
copies of it? You have, can you get the copies?
I would have liked to have seen all this.
Can I make a
Prior.
suggestion? Can I make a suggestion? Can we well, like, we make copies of that, we recess for a half hour, the board gets to review everything, and then we come back.
Actually makes sense.
I like that suggestion. I agree.
Okay, so we'll recess for a half hour to give us time to review all the documents.
I didn't know we get
And similarly, they did not have these additional pages. And I did that intentionally. In other words, the documents should be presented to the board at the hearing. In the first time around, Chief Poirier walked them through most of the 281 pages. And now presumably he'll walk them through these additional pages. So it was intentional not to give them. The only difference is I didn't make notebook copies for them as I did last time, so we had to take time to do that.
And I wasn't aware, so I also didn't make multiple copies.
I'm sorry.
And I wasn't aware of that, so I also didn't make multiple copies.
Okay, yeah.
We're going to do is we're going to allow you to go ahead. We're going to give the chief 10 minutes to address this latest evidence and then you 10 minutes to rebut it. And then the board will ask questions after that. What everybody just read right here. Okay, that's fine. Yep,
Right,
you all set
10
for that?
minutes, 10 minutes?
Yep.
During our last hearing, Sergeant Sullivan's attorney had requested that minutes of some previous non-public meetings with the Board of Selectmen be opened up for review. Those were the meetings of August 13th and of 2020, and the emergency meeting of August 16th, 2020. I had the opportunity to review those minutes, and I also did some follow-up, and I also had the opportunity to prepare a rules and regulation violation for Sergeant Sullivan, which I'm going to read, and I would suggest that you pay close attention to the dates. On August 7th, 2019, Sergeant Sullivan responded to shots fired call in Barnstead, in a Barnstead report, number 19-268-OF, call for service 19-112-AR at the Dollar General in Barnstead, which ultimately resulted in the Belknap Regional Operations Group being activated. It was believed at the time that the 3 suspects who had fled the scene of the shooting with the involved firearm were now barricaded in the residence and refused to come out per state police orders. Sergeant Jim Sullivan was on the scene when Chief Poirier arrived, and Jim Sullivan was present when he spoke to a female subject who had initially refused to exit the residence upon state police commands. Shortly thereafter, the remaining 2 individuals came out of the home after state police made phone contact with them. Chief Poirier determined that these 2 individuals were not the suspects from the Dollar General shooting and confirmed that the suspects we were looking for had actually showed up with the suspect's vehicle and the firearm, leaving the suspect's vehicle parked on the property and left the area in a different vehicle. Deputy Sheriff Dave Perkins wanted the 2 individuals arrested, although the Barnstead police had nothing to charge them with. And when Chief Poirier told Deputy Perkins that these were not our suspects from the shooting and that we were not arresting them, Dave Perkins made the comment, "You call out the big guns and you're not going to arrest anyone?" At this point, Deputy Perkins ordered all of his team members to leave the area. Following the incident with Deputy Perkins, Chief Poirier asked Jim Sullivan to walk over to the suspect's vehicle with him so that he could obtain from Jim Sullivan the location of all of the Barnstead officers and strategize a plan to safely search the home. At this time, Jim Sullivan was standing within 2 feet of Chief Poirier, and they were face to face having this discussion. Chief Poirier also told Jim Sullivan that what had just transpired between Dave Perkins and the chief. As Chief Poirier and Jim Sullivan were talking, Dave Perkins walked over to where the 2 were standing and told the chief and Sullivan that he had just spoken with the female who resided at the residence, and she had given him permission to search the house. Deputy Perkins asked Chief Poirier if he wanted some of his team to search the home, to which Chief Poirier agreed to have them complete. On August 11th, 2019, Corporal Ryan completed a report regarding this incident, and Jim Sullivan reviewed and electronically signed on August 16th, 2019. On August 15th, 2019, Sergeant Betancourt completed a report regarding this incident. Sergeant Jim Sullivan reviewed and electronically signed this report on August 29th. On September 29th, 2019, part-time officer Jason Levitt completed a report regarding this incident, which Jim Sullivan reviewed and electronically signed on September 29th, 2019. On September 29th, 2019, Jim Sullivan approved the case file in IMC. On September 29th, 2019, Jim Sullivan completed a report for this case. On August 13th, 2020, over 1 year after the Dollar General shooting, Sergeant Sullivan requested a non-public meeting with the Barnstead Board of Selectmen. During this meeting, as noted in the minutes, Jim Sullivan alleged that the police chief did something that was not criminal, but egregious. The officers who requested this meeting injected many aspersions against Chief Poirier without actual documentation or evidence of wrongdoing. Listed below are some of the experts that were extrapolated from the minutes in which board members inquire from the officers about the police chief's disposition. Selectman Rick Darian asked Jim if Jim had ever seen the chief be over-aggressive or temper-wise abusive, and Jim said he hasn't. Selectman Ed Tasker asked Jim, in his experience of working with chief, did the chief ever have a short fuse? And Jim said He's been working a long time with him, but no. Ed Tasker commented that he was looking for some pattern of outbursts, aggressiveness, etc. And Jim said, no, there is no pattern. Ed Tasker asked if Jim had ever witnessed the chief threatening him or officers because of the way the officers did their job, and Jim said no. Rick Therian commented that Jim said the chief was not aggressive. Rick Therian asked if they had ever smelled alcohol on the chief during duty, and Jim said, I said, Jason said no, but I believe it's supposed to be, Jim said no. I have to refer back to my notes. Diane Bijah, during the same meeting, asked Jason Levitt if he was yelled at by the chief when Jason told him that Secret Service was there, and Jason said no. During this meeting, the pot case, an active investigation was brought up, and Jim stated that he did not go to the call because he knew where it would go. On August 15th, just 2 days after this previous non-public meeting, Sergeant Sullivan sent an email to the Board of Selectmen stating, I would like to request a meeting with the Board of Selectmen as I have new information that I believe the board should be made aware of that is concerning in nature. Due to the severity of the topic, I feel the board needs to be advised prior to the start of the upcoming work week. On August 16th, the Barnstead Board of Selectmen held an emergency meeting at the request of Jim Sullivan. Listed below are the experts and the extrapolated minutes in which Jim Sullivan tells the Board of Selectmen that he has a report that is concerning, but isn't sure that he can release it. Jim told the group that he had information that he believes is extremely important, but was waiting confirmation from the county attorney in order to release it to the board. Jim told the group that he doesn't know how the board will read this and their jaws not drop. Jim mentioned that the chief violated the department's standard operating procedures as well as some town personnel policies. He stated that one violation is having alcohol in his system while on call, or on a call. Another is not only the chief's attitude towards the police department employees, but also an extremely unprofessional that the chief was extremely confrontational and lied to an agency. Jim told the group that the report he has is from an individual and very concerning to them as officers. Rick Therian asked what the chances are of Jim getting back to them today, where it's Sunday, and Jim said he didn't know if the person he was waiting for to hear from was on vacation or somewhere unreachable. Jim told the board that the incident report will give them a lot of information. Gary Madden asked what he had in Barnstead for the report of the incident, and Jim didn't remember. Ed Tasker asked who wrote the report, and Jim said he did. Rick Therian inquired if Jason had to write one too, where he was there. Jim commented that at an incident, he and Jason were separated from the chief, so Jim's report didn't reflect too much about it. Jim gave Karen Montgomery the information of the report, incident 19-142-OF. Subsequently, after leaving the meeting and returning a while later, Jim Sullivan produced a personal narrative from Deputy Sheriff Dave Perkins. Jim commented that it was a very fluid situation. He was never close enough to smell alcohol. Jim added that the chief did tell him that he and Perkins had an altercation, but Jim, was not privy to any of their conversation. MRI completed a follow-up. MRI was hired to conduct a follow-up internal investigation to clarify some issues and to look into missing thumb drive and files taken from a locked cabinet in the chief's office while the chief was on administrative leave. On December 15th, MRI investigator Mike Magnet interviewed Jim Sullivan. Prior to the start of the interview, Mike Magnet first read Jim Sullivan his Garrity warning, and Sullivan agreed to speak with the investigator Magnet. During the interview, Mike Magnet asked Sullivan about the Perkins report that he provided to the Board of Selectmen on August 16, 2020. Jim Sullivan told investigator Magnet that he wasn't sure, but sometime during the summer, he had heard info that the chief had been drinking on the night of the Dollar General store incident. Jim Sullivan stated that he had heard information from Adam Painshaw, an Alton police officer who is also on the BSOG SWAT team. Jim Sullivan then told investigator Magnet that he contacted former Deputy Sheriff Dave Perkins and learned that he had written a report of the incident, Sullivan told investigator Magnet that Perkins had provided him with a copy of that report. Jim Sullivan also told Mike Magnet that he wasn't sure on the exact date, but it was around the time of the Trump campaign event. When questioned about Jim Sullivan's curiosity surrounding the report, he told Mike Magnet that it was a report related to an incident in Barnstead. Investigator Magnet makes the following notation. During the previous investigation, Sullivan told me that he did not perceive an odor of alcoholic beverage on the chief, nor did he note any impairment. Investigator Mike Magnet also asked Jim Sullivan if he had gone into the chief's office and into a locked file cabinet, and Jim Sullivan admitted to doing so. Jim Sullivan claimed he had concerns that background investigations were not being completed on applicants for police officer positions. So he went into the files to see for himself. Jim Sullivan justifies it by saying that he used to do background investigations, but the chief stopped that practice for some reason. On May 27th, Chief Poirier was at the Belknap County Sheriff's Department and spoke with High Sheriff William Wright regarding Jim Sullivan and the Perkins report. Chief Poirier inquired from Sheriff Wright if he had ever provided a report to Jim Sullivan, which was written by former Belknap County Deputy Sheriff Dave Perkins regarding the BSOG, or the SWAT call-out, and the shooting at the Dollar General. Sheriff Wright told Chief Poirier that he had, and that Jim Sullivan had called the Sheriff's Department looking to speak with him or Sheriff number 11. This was documented in a note from a Sheriff's Department dispatch log dated 8/14 at 15:36 hours, which
I'm
you
going
have
to
in front
stop
of you.
you right there. Your 10 minutes is up. So we're going to go on to,
I didn't even get to the
I
conclusion.
understand, but you clearly told you had 10 minutes to do that. So if there's any back and forth, we'll deal with it at that time.
I have a letter I'd like to present from Bill Wright documenting that
I think it was
Jim
part
Sullivan
of,
had called him.
it was part of this
Yep.
packet, so we do have it here.
Okay,
This one right here?
yes.
Yep. Thank you.
So I'm beginning at 6:10 p.m.
Yes.
Everyone agree? And I'm going to have 60 minutes plus 10 for
Correct, yep.
70 minutes. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening.
Do you understand that you're still under oath?
I do.
Is there anything from your testimony on May 18th, 2021 that you need to change or correct?
Nope.
Great. With regard to this latest, oh, no, it's my fault. I knew that. And microphone here without clobbering it. With regard to this latest alleged violation on June 8th, dated June 8th, 2021. Camera footage of the conversation that you've described in paragraph 3 on the first page? I'm looking at the first page, paragraph 3. Violation dated June 8th, 2021.
There is camera footage of my speaking to one of the individuals and a police officer at that scene.
So your body camera was turned on at all times?
Not at all times, no.
Why was it turned off?
Excuse me?
Why was it turned off?
It wasn't turned on during the entire time. I turned it on when the suspects came out of the house. I didn't at that time.
Was your body camera on when you were?
No, it was not.
So this entire paragraph 3 is just your allegation of confrontation. Is that correct?
Paragraph 3 is a fact.
How do we know it's that?
I'm telling you, it's a fact. It happened.
And all of these allegations in here, are they all that?
If I wrote them down, they're a fact.
If information comes to light, an officer is intoxicated on the job, does this officer have a duty to disclose that information?
He does.
And whom do they they make that disclosure?
They should make that disclosure. In this instance, if it was a police chief, it should have been made to perhaps the sheriff or the county attorney.
And why would they reach the sheriff or the county attorney when they're not supervisors?
Well, they need to investigate the incident. Who else is going to investigate the incident? It's not up to a police sergeant to investigate his police chief. It's up to the county attorney, the attorney general's office.
We're not talking about an investigation, we're talking about a report. If the report properly meets the report in charge of firing and discipline of the police chief?
No, that incident that we're referring to should have been made to the high sheriff, the county attorney, or the attorney general's office to investigate.
And isn't it true that the report of your intoxication on the incident that you're referring to largely, on August 7th, 2019, was actually made in the first instance by the county sheriff, David Perkins, Deputy Sheriff David Perkins?
David Perkins put it in a report. Sergeant Sullivan did a report, and so did 5 other officers from my department. There's nothing in any of those reports about the chief being intoxicated or having alcohol in his breath.
Right, and the allegation here is that, according to you, is that truthfulness. Members will speak the truth at all times, under all circumstances. Members will not knowingly make false reports or enter or cause to be entered any false or improper information into any report or department document. And the second allegation is prohibited conduct unbecoming an officer, shall include that which brings the department into disrepute or reflects discredit upon the officer as a member of the department, or that which impairs the operation or efficiency of the department or the officer. That's correct?
That's correct.
So I find it interesting that you spend time on page 2 telling us how Detective Sergeant Sullivan answered certain questions, including whether or not actually that might be on page 3, but on whether or not he'd ever personally been aware of you being under the influence of alcohol on the job.
Right. Correct.
So do you think Sergeant Sullivan was lying when he said no to those questions?
I don't think he was lying that night, but I don't know what changed his mind after he received the Perkins report when Sergeant Sullivan was on the scene face to face with me that night.
Chief, do you not understand that both things can be true? That one person can perceive that someone is intoxicated on the job and another person cannot perceive that?
I understand that.
And is it your position then that an officer only has a duty to disclose it if they've witnessed it themselves?
Sergeant Sullivan was the closest to me that night, all night.
Well, that's your defense, Chief. Does that take away the disclosure
No,
obligation?
that's a fact.
Does that eliminate the disclosure obligation? Are you suggesting that the officers of Barnstead Police Department can decide for themselves whether or not they should disclose if an officer has been intoxicated on the job?
They have a duty to disclose and address the situation.
And that duty doesn't involve their subjective evaluation when there's been a direct report that an officer is intoxicated. Is that correct?
If Sergeant Sullivan thought I was intoxicated or smelled alcohol, then he should have addressed it.
I agree. But if Sergeant Sullivan received a report that you were intoxicated and smelled like alcohol, then he also had a duty to disclose that.
Then he should have reported it to the county attorney and not just asked the county attorney if he could release that report or ask the sheriff's department to investigate it.
The essence of your allegation is that Sergeant Sullivan was dishonest for disclosing the report about your intoxication on the job to your office instead of reporting them to the county sheriff or county attorney. Is that what I'm understanding?
Sergeant Sullivan, if he thought I was intoxicated, he should have presented his reports, not just the Dave Perkins report, when he knew the issue with Dave Perkins, and he knew that Dave Perkins had left the sheriff's department under investigation.
Are you aware that the board comments, the board was concerned about your retaliating against officers for and relaying their concerns?
Excuse me?
Are you aware that the Board of Selectmen was concerned about your retaliate against officers for coming to them with their concerns about you?
Just what I've read in the minutes.
And did you read in the minutes that the board had assured the officers that they would not be retaliated against?
Yes, I believe so.
And at the end of this, the actual warning, actually, it's on page 7. The last paragraph before we get to the alleged violations or the alleged reprimand, you indicate in that paragraph that the evidence documented undoubtedly has no place in professional law enforcement and could be caused for involvement in place under the public evidence gathering method. Is that your recommendation to you?
It is.
And what is the EES?
The exculpatory evidence schedule, also known as the Lorry list, for officers with credibility issues. What impact does it have? Well, if Sergeant Sullivan's put on the exculpatory evidence schedule, he will have to give that information to defense anytime that he has to go testify, and a judge would take it under review and whether or not his testimony would affect the outcome of the trial. Correct. I'm not trying to I'm trying to get to the bottom of the truth, and that's it.
Being on the EES effectively detective?
There are police officers, there are a lot of police officers on the EES list. I don't know. I'm sure there probably are.
So it's your position that a detective who's on a relatively short number of officers in the state for having been found to have credibility problems can actually function as a detective.
I didn't testify to that.
Well, you said I'm sure there are. Why are you? What's the basis for being sure that there are?
There's a lot of police officers on that list.
You go to page 12. The pages aren't numbered, but it's the 4th page after page 8, which is numbered.
Well, mine are out of order now. You're talking about the Perkins report, the BSOG, Belknap County? I have it.
And what's the date in your top right corner?
August 14th, 2020.
And what was the date that Detective Sergeant Sullivan notified the board had this information regarding your or Deputy Sheriff Perkins reporting that you were intoxicated on the job?
August 16th.
That was the date that he met with the board, correct?
Right. On August 15th, 2 days after the initial meeting, he wanted to meet with the board, requesting an emergency meeting.
And 1 day after the date on this report, correct?
That's correct. The day after he got it from Sheriff Perkins and not Sheriff Wright and not Dave Perkins, as he told Investigator Magnet where he got it from.
So your allegation in here that implies that he waited over a year to disclose this information is not accurate, is it?
He waited over a year to bring this report to the board. He told the board that he got the report from Dave Perkins when he got it from the sheriff, Bill Wright.
How do you know what he told the board?
It's in the minutes.
Well, the minutes don't say to me that he had a copy of the report. They indicate to me on August 16th that he had a copy then and was waiting to see that if he could release it. Is that not a correct interpretation, August 16th?
He requested the meeting on August 16th because he had this information.
Because he had received a report, correct?
Said he'd like to request a meeting with the board, selectmen, as I have new information I believe the board should be made aware of that is concerning in nature due to the severity of the topic. I feel the board needs to be advised prior to the start of the upcoming week. He said he had information that was extremely important, but was waiting for confirmation from the county attorney. So that their jaws would drop.
So is it your position, chief, that he had a duty to disclose, he shouldn't have disclosed it the way he disclosed it, but he should have disclosed it before he actually had a report that stated it just because he was aware that it might be coming?
Counselor, he knew I wasn't under the influence. He was there.
So are we back to he shouldn't have disclosed it, or he should have?
If he had information, he should have brought it to the county attorney's office. He knew the information was false. He knew Dave Perkins had no credibility.
Form of a written report, it's accurate that he brought the report.
So Detective Sullivan took this report to the Board of Selectmen, but he knew that the information was inaccurate because he was there himself. He was with me that night. So why would he bring this Dave Perkins report when he knew the disagreement Dave Perkins and I had that night? Why would he bring that to the board? Why wouldn't he bring his report to the board? Why wouldn't he give the 5 other officers that were there their reports? And why didn't any of the other officers from the Belknap County Sheriff's Department put that I had alcohol in my breath? There was another report here that I gave to you from another sheriff's officer. There's nothing in there about alcohol. Nobody else says alcohol but Dave Perkins.
Isn't it true that there were actually 2 crime scenes that night?
Correct. I don't know who was at what scene. I wasn't at both scenes myself.
So not every officer actually interacted, correct?
A lot of officers did. All my officers did. And quite a few on the SWAT team did as well.
You interacted with both Officer Betancourt and Officer Levitt that night?
I did.
And how did you first interact with Officer Levitt that night?
At the police station.
Isn't it true, Chief, that you got lost somewhere in Barnstead and couldn't find your way to this scene of this crime and Officer Levitt had to go find you?
No, the GPS didn't take me to the right location.
When we were here on May 18th, you were holding up a bunch of labels. And I just wanted to clarify a few points about that. You said you reviewed video that showed Sullivan printing. And then I asked you a question about if there was any video showing Detective Sergeant Sullivan putting them in the trash can. And you said no. Was there video of someone else putting them in the trash can?
No, I told you that night there's no video in the squad room of the EOC. So we don't know who put them in the trash can. You can't see somebody putting them in the trash can. You can see them being printed up.
And just to clarify the allegation, are you alleging that Detective Sergeant Sullivan neglected to put labels on files?
Excuse me, say that again?
Are you alleging that Detective Sergeant Sullivan neglected to put labels on files, or were these perhaps extra labels?
He printed them up. They were not on the files that he made up. So yes, he didn't put them on the files.
Did the files that he made up have labels
No.
Files with no label?
Right, he didn't put the labels on them.
And was that because there was a problem with the printer?
No, because they printed up.
When did they print up, Chief? I mean, you saw him on video, so did you see him
Yeah,
print them up and retrieve them and do nothing with them?
I seen him print them up, take them off the printer, and then he went into the EOC.
And there were a number of files that we've already established that Detective Sergeant Sullivan was working on that day, correct?
Correct.
So we know that, how do you know that it was the labels that you found were the ones that he printed, or were the only ones that he printed, rather?
Were the only ones he printed that night?
I'm sorry?
How do I know they're the only ones he printed?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand.
They were printed for case numbers that he had actually pulled cases for that night that were, what, a year, 2 years old?
And why would he go to the trouble of printing labels and then not using them?
You'll have to ask him that question.
Would it surprise you to know that I have? One of the other new items we received tonight was an affidavit from Anthony Estee. Chief?
I did.
To not this case. That relates to which? Sorry, number 7.
89.
Yeah, number 7. Well, I've given. From the first night. Which is the marijuana case. The marijuana seizure. And looking at your written reprimand in the first paragraph, you say that it was Detective Sergeant Sullivan who had a conversation with Tony Estee. It was Detective Sergeant Sullivan who told Tony Estee that, or who requested that Tony Estee file a motion with the court with erroneous information based about the substance of the search, whether or not there was consent. Is that correct?
Well, reread it in context. You told, why don't you read it the way it's written?
I can. It's just a lot of extra words. During the month of October 2020, you had a conversation with our department prosecutor, Tony Estee, in reference to a residence that was searched by the Barnstead Police Department for illegal drugs. The residence was searched pursuant to a consent search, which you were fully aware of. You told Attorney Estee that the home was searched by the police department without obtaining consent, and you requested Attorney Estee to file a motion with the court with the erroneous information that you provided to him.
Correct.
And do you stand by that paragraph?
I do.
And are you aware that Attorney Estee has given us a different account?
I'm aware of the affidavit he did.
And do you have reason to believe that Attorney Estee would lie under oath?
No, I do not.
Were you aware of Sergeant Ryan's involvement in this matter?
I was aware of some of his involvement in the matter.
And were you aware of that prior to our last meeting?
Yes.
And what was the extent of your awareness? What did you know?
I knew that he was an evidence officer, and he was involved in processing the evidence, and that he had actually had, I think he had a copy of the actual motion.
And
because I discussed it with him.
in your discussions, did you discuss whether or not he had had any conversations or communications with Attorney Esty?
No, I didn't go into great detail. I only inquired because he was the evidence officer, or one of the evidence officers.
And did you discuss with him whether or not he had had any conversations or communications with Detective Sergeant Sullivan?
I don't recall the exact content of our conversation.
In his affidavit, Attorney Esty says that he recalls that he had discussion with now Sergeant Ryan and Detective Sergeant Sullivan about a motion for destruction/disposition of the evidence. Is that correct?
Oh, what he says is, I recall Sergeant Sullivan indicating that the case was not going forward. No one was going to be charged, and the case was essentially closed. Sergeant Sullivan indicated the reason that the case was not proceeding was due to a problem with the search, which resulted in the discovery of seizure of evidence. And then Tony says, I don't recall the exact language used by Sergeant Sullivan during the conversation, but in general gist of the conversation was that the search was unlawful. I specifically recall him making references to the fact that there was no warrant and that there should have been a warrant under the circumstances. I do not recall in detail how in-depth our discussion was about the search, except that I came away with the belief that the evidence was unlawfully seized. And then
Well-
Sergeant Sullivan's assessment by Sergeant Sullivan, since the request was to destroy evidence in the case.
I'm sorry, where was that last part?
He
from?
said, I had little incentive at the time to scrutinize the assessment by Sergeant Sullivan since the request was to destroy evidence in the case.
So yes, he does say those things, but actually what he first says is that he was asked to file a motion authorizing the destruction of the drugs and drug-related paraphernalia in August or early September of 2020, correct? That's in paragraph 3?
Correct.
And at that time, he makes no mention of any reason being given for the motion or the need to destroy the evidence.
Well, that's the way he wrote up his you'll have to ask Tony how he phrases his affidavits.
So in paragraph 6, when he says, prior to drafting the motion to destroy the requested evidence, I recognize that there was no case associated with the motion and therefore no assigned docket number at the court. This is important because the court is generally reluctant to accept or act upon any motion unrelated to a past or pending case. I spoke with a clerk who indicated that if I filed something, she would put it before the judge and see if he was willing to issue an order without having a pending case or docket number. And then the next paragraph 7, as a result of the uncertainty that the court would entertain the motion, I wanted to ensure that I was providing the judge with enough information for him to be able to make an informed decision about whether he should grant the motion or not. Paragraph 8, I recall having a conversation with Sergeant Sullivan at the police department about whether anyone had been or would be charged or whether there was any ongoing investigation. So doesn't Attorney Esty's affidavit indicate that actually that when it was communicated to him that a motion was needed, the decision had already been made to destroy the evidence because the case was not moving forward, that it wasn't until he realized that there was an obstacle with the court and went back and got more information that he learned the rationale behind the destruction as it relates to the search?
I can't testify to what Tony Esty learned or didn't learn. You'll have to talk to Tony Esty about that.
Tony Esty also says in here in paragraph 3 that he does not recall the exact language that was used at this discussion. But yet in your allegation, you say exactly what Detective Sergeant, you accuse Detective Sergeant Sullivan of using very precise words. What was the basis for your allegation?
Because I remember the conversation exactly when I talked to Tony. And my other concern is that Sergeant Sullivan wrote a report on September 4th, 2020, requesting, he says, after further investigation, this case has been closed, period. That's his report. And then he does a report on December 25th, 2020, to indicate what what he did at the scene. And another concerning matter is that he told the Board of Selectmen in a non-public meeting that he never responded to this call, which is false.
You understand that the Board of Selectmen minutes are not word for word, correct?
I understand that.
So if Detective Sergeant Sullivan had actually said to the Board of Selectmen that he did not initially respond to the meeting, but then did not respond to the call, excuse me, but then did go to the scene of that call, that would be accurate, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't. Let's go look at the minutes.
I didn't say, I'm not asking you about the accuracy of the minutes. I'm
He
saying
said-
if he had said
He
that
said
to
he
the
did not
board,
go to the call.
if he had said to the board that he initially did not go to the call.
He didn't say initially. Let's look at the minutes.
No,
We can
you're-
clarify it.
No, Chief, I'm not going to argue with you about it. The board knows whether or not that actually happened.
It's in the minutes.
He wrote a report on the case. Obviously, he's not disputing
He
whether or
wrote a
not he
report
was
after he closed out the case.
at the scene. Is it not true, Chief, that Detective Sergeant Sullivan was called to the scene due to the large volume of drugs and drug paraphernalia that was being seized from the
Yes.
scene?
Yes, I had Sergeant Betancourt call him to the scene because he was sitting in his office when we needed the help.
So when the call first was initiated, Detective Sergeant Sullivan was not there, correct?
He was not there.
So am I correct in understanding, Chief, that you say that your conversation with Attorney Esty is fact, even where Attorney Esty says he does not recall the exact words used?
Correct. It's fact. I remember the conversation I had with Tony.
And did you notice in the minutes on August 13th, 2020, that whoever was recording for the board noted that what Detective Sergeant Sullivan said was that when you go in a house and see large amounts of stuff, you secure the entire perimeter and wait until the search warrant comes?
That's a strategy. Yes, you could do that.
Is it a strategy, Chief, or is it actually best practices?
It all depends on the circumstance. You got to consider the totality of the circumstances.
Well, didn't you tell me last time we met that it would be the proper police procedure? It's always the better proper
It's
police
always
procedure?
best to get a search warrant, but there were a lot of things that day to consider.
Can I just ask, when you reference somewhere, if you could please let the board know so that we can follow along?
I thought I did. Attorney Esty's affidavit and.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm talking about when you were talking about the August 13th minutes.
Oh, where in the minutes?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you.
I can tell you where it was just so you can find it. It's on page 7 of the minutes in the very bottom paragraph.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the August 13th minutes, Jim stated
Questions,
that
Chief?
he didn't go to the call because he knew where it would
We're
go.
not going to have it back and forth,
My time.
please. So she has the floor.
She opened it up.
Thank you.
I'm going to look next at the alleged violation that starts with 000032.
What page is it on? 32?
Yes. Let me ask you first, did Detective Sergeant Sullivan have authority to sign off on reports?
He did. Major cases, I wanted sent up to me. Or at least I wanted to keep abreast of what was going on. Well, we would talk daily, have conversations about certain cases.
Item, sorry, on page 32, this alleged violation relates to the body that was found in the woods, correct?
Yes,
In the very first sentence, you indicate that the incident occurred on April 4th, 2020.
correct. Well, I remember it was Easter, so it was April 12th. So the date's wrong. The board should have them.
Said that your allegation was that he had seized a cellular phone, never processed the items and never did anything with them. And it's a failure to, it's an evidence on paper, but when you were talking about it, you also
He failed to follow my orders and investigate it, yes. And he did a one-page report. At times he did. At times he trained Officer Geely. I believe he trained Officer, either Officer Marshall or Trevor Jesse. No, he didn't train Officer Betancourt.
Did you review the documents that you sent to me, Chief?
I did.
You indicated that he did a one-page report. Isn't it true, multiple supplemental reports?
I believe we discussed this during the last meeting. He did 10 other supplemental reports the night that he received information that the guy may have been murdered. Excuse me? No, you better read the reports.
The fact that you knew you wrote this evaluation met on May 18th and put them today, and you repeatedly allegations and failed to investigate. You knew then that he had dropped off the phone for processing. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I knew that I don't know if he had taken the phone, either he or Sergeant Betancourt. I'm not sure. I don't recall exactly. But there was a phone taken to Alton, and I believe Adam Penshaw did something with the phone, but obviously didn't do enough because the information that was extracted by state police wasn't extracted by Sergeant Sullivan or in any of his reports.
Issue to track phone wire carrier for the phone to find out.
I I believe I sent them a
I'm still
track
asking the
phone.
question to find out both the contact information for the phone owner, but also usage reports.
I believe I did that.
Where's your report saying that you did that? Because I see a report here
Yeah,
saying that Detective
there's no
Sergeant
report.
Sullivan did
There
it.
should be documents to track phone with my name on it, requesting that information.
And you're aware that there was a supplemental report about investigative work done with respect to the logo on the sweatshirt?
I am. And that report was done when?
I'm asking the questions, Chief. No, you struggle with that.
I'd like to ask that we have a little bit of respect for each other. I don't think we need the barbs going back and forth. Thank you.
What's the date of the report, Chief, that tells us that this is now being viewed as a murder?
On January 21st, 2021.
On January 21st, 2021. Well, Chief, I'm looking at a narrative by you, actually, on April 29th, 2021.
There's one on January 21st done by Sergeant Sullivan on January 20. You asked me a question. I'm answering it for you.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
would you please moderate this meeting because I'm getting a little tired of listening to it. We've been here longer than we intended to, and I don't believe we've heard anything that's going to change our opinion.
Well, the attorney, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say your last name.
Verjega.
Has an hour and 10 minutes, and she still has 20 minutes left, so.
20 minutes.
Yeah. So I will again repeat to please be respectful, and we do not need sarcasm or barbs going back and forth.
Understood.
Thank you.
Chief, isn't it true that on April 29th, 2021, you completed a narrative in the indicating that informed you that the case was being closed and the cause of death is hypothermia?
That is true? Yes.
I know you folks don't have a copy handy. I can give you my copy. Additional documents related to this. Have it available to you. I don't know why the board wasn't given everything.
I do. Yes, I am. Sometimes I'll take them. Officers will take them. Citizens will take them, send them to me.
Sergeant Sullivan had been dishonest when he accurately reported to the county attorney's office that a shotgun was not in the evidence records. Do you recall that?
I recall that, yes.
And isn't it true, Chief, that you had taken a picture of that shotgun and posted it on Facebook?
That's correct. Where was it? When? It was found in evidence as soon as it was brought to my attention by the owner that we had this shotgun. When it was relayed to her or relayed to the county attorney by Sergeant Sullivan that we did not have it. And as soon as I found out that this woman was claiming we had it and she showed us the picture, I immediately went down to the evidence room with Sergeant Ryan, and the green shotgun was right there readily being seen. I mean, you could see it. Stood out.
But why hadn't it been placed in evidence?
It was in evidence.
Why hadn't it been properly recorded in the IMC?
I couldn't tell you. I'm not an evidence officer.
Well, did you investigate the,
When
Reason
I
why it
did,
wasn't
as
in?
soon as it came to my attention,
and what did your investigation reveal?
we still haven't found out why or how it got in there and why it wasn't documented properly.
I'm looking at the allegation that starts on page 97. And Sergeant Ryan was an evidence officer, is that correct?
He was, but he was not an evidence officer at the time that we did the search of this home. We seized this gun.
When did he become an evidence officer?
I don't recall, but I do know that he was not an evidence officer at this time.
Do you know?
No, I don't. I don't remember.
Is it correct that Officer Ryan was an evidence officer at the time the weapon was being returned?
Yes, that's correct.
So on December 23rd, 2020, he was an evidence officer.
Correct.
Was he a newly minted evidence officer at that point?
No, I think he's been an evidence officer a year and a half, 2 years. I don't recall the exact time, but he's been a little while. He's been in there for a little while.
Look at page 106. The first paragraph of that sentence says, I informed him about my conversation with Detective Sergeant Sullivan about this matter and told him that I had not spoken with the Belknap County attorney about the shotgun. The him in that sentence is huge. Is that correct? Did I read that accurately?
Can you say that again?
Last sentence in the first paragraph. Sergeant Ryan is referring to you and says, I informed him about my conversation with Detective Sergeant Sullivan about this matter and told him that I had not spoken with the Belknap County attorney about the shotgun. Is that correct?
I want to read what the context of the whole paragraph is before I answer that.
It's page 106.
Yes, that's correct.
Doesn't that imply then, Chief, that, actually, doesn't it clearly state, not imply, that Detective Sergeant Sullivan did speak with Officer Ryan about the shotgun?
Sergeant Ryan spoke to Sergeant Sullivan about the shotgun when he was made aware that this woman had claimed or had information that we had that shotgun. I'm telling you what occurred.
And in that conversation, Detective Sergeant Sullivan didn't ask if there was a green shotgun?
You're going to have to ask Sergeant Ryan about the conversation he had with Sergeant Sullivan.
That's your allegation, Chief. That he hadn't, that he, first of all, you said he didn't even talk. He didn't bother to speak to your former admin officer. Now you're saying that he had a conversation and I haven't heard from him. What are you saying? Can you track your allegation?
I'm not retracting anything. I'm not retracting anything.
I'm going to show you a couple documents from the department. Can you tell me the record?
This is a employee status notification form B, and I didn't have this ahead of time. I don't know why you're giving it to me now. I always give you my stuff in advance.
Well, you
But go
gave
ahead.
it to me, Chief.
But go ahead.
This was in the documents that you provided in response to my request, was it not?
I don't think I gave you this. You might have gotten this from Town Hall.
Well, it was represented to me as being part of Detective Sergeant Sullivan's personnel file that was maintained by you at the police department as opposed to the file that was maintained by the town. And what is the purpose of this employee status notification form?
This is to notify the New Hampshire Police Standards and Training Council that Sergeant Sullivan was being suspended for a period of 10 days.
That's the first page, right?
Correct.
What do the second two pages say?
The second page says that he's being suspended for an active criminal investigation.
Is that accurate, Chief?
It is accurate. That's part of, I would say, yes.
So Detective Sergeant Sullivan is being criminally investigated?
Well, it's not a matter that I can speak to at this moment.
Who's doing the investigation, Chief?
I can't comment on that.
Chief, did you misrepresent Detective Sergeant Sullivan's status to the New Hampshire Police Standards and Training Council in a further act of retaliation against him?
No, I've never retaliated against Sergeant Sullivan. And again, this is something that I can't comment on during this hearing.
Chief, have you attempted?
I've never attempted to initiate a criminal investigation against him. I reported information to where I needed to report it to. I can't comment.
July of 2020.
Yes, I did, for a good job that he had done.
And isn't it true that your difficulties with Detective Sergeant Sullivan didn't start until after you came back from leave and suddenly had many issues with this department?
I would say we probably had some issues just prior to my being put out.
Prior to being put on leave with Detective Sergeant Sullivan.
I never really had a chance to see Sergeant Sullivan because of the shift he was on and because of all the vacation time and sick time that he had taken. So we really never had any discussions. In fact, he had sent the Board of Selectmen an email that he would not communicate with me in any way, shape, or form, regardless of my rank or anyone else in my department for that matter. So no, we did not have any discussions.
Accurate. Witnesses present, isn't it?
Well, let me actually tell you what's accurate, because that way I'm not putting any.
No, you're not going to go look at the documents and waste my time, Chief.
No, I'm not
No.
going, my document's right here.
Again, the attorney
Okay.
has her time.
All right.
And then the board will be having our time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Isn't it more accurate to say that he said he wanted there to be witnesses
No, it's not.
Said anything limiting his communication with you, have you already made several complaints of retaliation against you?
He had made a complaint, yes.
Okay. Let's talk about allegations of child abuse and neglect. Last time we talked about this, I questioned whether or not police officers were supposed to be conducting their own parallel investigation to DCYF. Every time the law enforcement agency was sent. And just to clarify, it's still your position that officers are required to investigate every referral that's received from DCYF in a parallel investigation,
We investigate them, yes.
every single one.
Yes,
And is Detective Sergeant Sullivan qualified to conduct those investigations?
yes.
And what are his qualifications for those investigations?
Well, he's a police officer. He gets his training at the academy. He's a seasoned detective.
So is he not supposed to have specific training before he interviews? Potential child victims?
He told me he's had a lot of training and he used to do these investigations in Merrimack.
Chief, did you confirm whether or not he was certified to conduct the trainings that you're saying that he was required to do?
You don't have to be certified to conduct investigations. He's a certified police officer. He can conduct investigations.
Isn't it true, Chief, that the law actually says that DCYF is supposed to be investigating in the first instance?
No,
Not true?
no.
And doesn't the law also say that DCYF can request assistance
Yes,
from state or any of its political subdivisions, and then such assistance and information as will enable DCYF to fulfill its responsibilities should be provided?
yes.
So I had an opportunity to look at the law enforcement or the requested, and I'll just read directly from there. DCYF is the agency mandated by RSA 169, Chapter 34, Section 2, to assess allegations of neglect, determine whether any child in the family or household is abused or neglected, including a determination of harm or threatened harm to each child. I'm going to stop. So it's your position that despite that guidance, law enforcement is expected to conduct their own independent and parallel investigation of every potential allegation of abuse or neglect.
Yes,
And is when you do those investigations, do you include DCYF in those investigations?
yes, we do.
And how does that happen?
And we also include the CAC.
So if DCYF has already done an investigation and conducted an interview, you, on your own initiative, your department conducts its own investigation?
We work with them.
And
Are you asking me a question?
I'm trying to. And we'll re-interview people, but then have them there?
No. So DCYF, if they refer a case to us, we will investigate it for criminal charges. DCYF takes care of the family side, victim advocacy, and things of that nature, like the CAC does.
Right, but most of the LEAs don't result in criminal charges, correct?
Most of them don't know, correct.
And isn't it true that actually most of them don't even result in abuse and neglect findings?
Well, I don't have the statistics for you.
Isn't it true, Chief, that the guidance is that officers shouldn't be acting outside of DCYF when an allegation first comes in?
No.
I'm just going to give the board.
Well, I don't find that to be an appropriate statement.
Chief, why did you feel it necessary to spend the time after the last hearing drafting an 8-page alleged violation of someone that you're already trying to fire with 31 other violations with subparts? I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 54.
Okay.
different
So let me correct that. It's a 7-page, not 8. It says 8 pages, but there's nothing on the 8th page. If I didn't do it, I wouldn't be doing my job. This new information came to me that showed that Sergeant Sullivan had credibility issues or has credibility issues. And if I didn't do anything, I would be neglecting my job as a police chief. So that's why he was written up.
Your resources should be spent
I'm not even going to comment to that.
the incident with David Perkins. Isn't that correct?
What's your question?
I said there's a whole section of this alleged violation that doesn't even pertain to Detective Sergeant Sullivan. Isn't that correct?
But it outlines what led up to Sergeant Sullivan bringing information to the board, which needed to be explained. And then, as you know, I've also given the board a letter from Sheriff William Wright, which indicates that the letter was given, or the report, the Perkins report, was given to Jim Sullivan by him and not as described by Jim Sullivan after he'd been read Garrity.
How many other officers at the Barnstead Police Department have you retaliated against, Chief?
I've never retaliated against anyone at all in my 36 years. And I am not doing it now. We're setting the record straight.
Whether or not you were intoxicated on the job?
I would suggest, unless you have absolute proof of that, that should not be even discussed whatsoever. Does not pertain to this hearing.
Well, it does now that it's been made an allegation against my client. It absolutely does. Chief, there was an allegation the first time around about failure to investigate an overdose. Do you recall that one?
I don't know, which one are you referring to?
It starts on page 10.
I'm sorry, what page?
Page 10?
And this will probably be the last thing because we are just at the end of your time.
Do you recall this allegation, Chief?
I do.
And the substance of the allegation, it was recently discovered that you never completed any reports or follow-up investigations for this case and only completed a brief narrative on March 14th, 2021, 14 months after the incident occurred. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you read the other documents in this case, Chief?
I did.
So I don't know if you recall, but last time you made mention of all the things that you felt should have been done in terms of evidence gathering and the protocol for that.
Yes.
And you why do you allege?
Said Sergeant Sullivan didn't do any follow-up investigations. He didn't even do a report.
Isn't it accurate that evidence was gathered?
Are you referring to Sergeant Betancourt's report? Because that's what I'm reading right now. Okay.
I'm also referring to your allegation that there was no follow-up investigation.
I think what I said that night, if I remember correctly, is that Sergeant Sullivan, there were witnesses on the scene. Sergeant Sullivan didn't investigate. There were some other things, investigatory things that he could have done that he did not do. And he didn't, and as a matter of fact, he didn't do a report on it. He's the sergeant, detective sergeant in charge. He does not do a report until how many years later?
Reports on because he had a file cabinet in his office and every day would take them out of that file cabinet and place them on his desk.
No,
I would not forget that he still owed reports on those cases.
no.
Well, then how did he know?
You'll have to ask him that.
On page 17, can you look at that last paragraph?
Of Derek Betancourt's report? Yeah.
Report. Derek Betancourt, if you read his report and Detective Sergeant Sullivan's report. Together,
They were at the scene, yes, together, yes.
correct?
Yes.
On the day of the incident, Derek Betancourt called the New Hampshire Department of Justice Overdose Task Force at approximately 1810 hours and spoke with John Harding. I explained the facts of our case, and he advised me that unless we were
Correct.
and this, the first sentence of the paragraph, I then something's redacted, cell phone to the Alton Police Department so that Detective Adam, I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, Penshaw, could conduct.
Correct. Again, I'd have to take a few minutes to read this report to see what you're saying is accurate. And again, I think I discussed it at length the other day when last time we were here, and we talked about the things that Sergeant Sullivan should have done, and that doesn't change. My statement doesn't change.
Relayed what they had done at that point, but the feedback wasn't much else to do.
No, it doesn't say that there wasn't much else to do.
No, but he says that he explained the facts of the case, which is at the end of his 4-page report of all of the steps that they've taken and witnesses they've interviewed. At the end of all of that, it's still that they can't even do an autopsy, correct?
I think what you said earlier is that if we had more evidence, we could do an autopsy. Sergeant Sullivan could have pulled the phone records. Sergeant Sullivan could have dumped the phone. Sergeant Sullivan could have tried to gather fingerprints. Sergeant Sullivan could have interviewed witnesses on the scene, which he did not. He's a detective sergeant. Well, where's Sergeant Sullivan's report? How am I going to assess what Sergeant Sullivan did if he doesn't write it down and do a report? And how can I give him guidance to move forward with this investigation if he's not doing a report or gathering evidence like he's supposed to be doing?
Chief, isn't it true that you weren't giving Sullivan guidance when he didn't ask for it on any of these cases?
Say that again?
You weren't giving unsolicited guidance on any of these cases?
That is not true. No, I was giving Sergeant Sullivan orders to investigate certain cases and do certain things. A lot of times he would tell me, I did this, I did that, it's taken care of.
Okay, time is up. We're going to open up so the board ask some questions.
Can I say something real
No,
quick?
we're done. Board is up now. I think, Gary, you had one comment that you wanted to make?
Just the fact that he keeps being brought up in intoxication. Unless I've missed it, I have not seen that anywhere. I've read smelling of alcohol or the odor of alcohol. I have not seen anything about anybody being intoxicated. Unless I've missed it, I'd like to clear that up.
Thank you. Okay. So we have 3 questions, and they're yes or no. I'd like to read an email that was dated February 16th from Jim Sullivan to Karen Montgomery and the board. Town Administrator Montgomery, Chairman Byer, Vice Chair Tarian, Selectman Mayor, Madden, and Tasker. Please be advised that due to the ongoing hostile, harassing, and targeting work environment, directed specifically at me since Chief Poirier's return on November 6, 2020, I will no longer communicate with Chief Poirier without including all of you in the dialogue. All communications between Chief Poirier and myself must be in the form of an email due to the ongoing hostile manner in which Chief Poirier has communicated to me when unmonitored. Furthermore, Chief Poirier is only to communicate to me through Town Administrator Montgomery and the Board of Selectmen, not through a third party to include the Barnstead Police Department staff. This does not include department-wide emails that are addressed to all staff members. Additionally, I will not be in the presence of Chief Poirier at any time due to his ongoing harassing, targeting, hostile, and now aggressive behavior directed at me. If I am to be in the presence of Chief Poirier, the town administrator, and at least 3 board selectmen must be present as well. At no time will Chief Poirier be near me physically while Sergeant Ryan is with him. Lastly, it is incumbent upon you to make clear to Chief Poirier and Sergeant Ryan that they are to have no further communications in any way, shape, or form between them in regards to me. I have brought this complaint about the hostile and harassing targeting work environment in which I've been working in since Chief Poirier's return on November 6, 2020 forward several times without any resolution. Chief Poirier's actions warrant a full investigation as to his abilities to continue in the role as Chief of Police in the town of Barnstead, New Hampshire. This email serves as a formal notice of complaint against Chief Paul Poirier. Signed, Detective Sergeant James P. Sullivan. Did you write this email? Yes or no?
Put my client up, and if there's a pending investigation that we're not going to be told anything about,
Could we please read
I'm not
Garrity?
going to have him answer any questions.
Are you saying he doesn't want him to answer the question?
I haven't, first of all, I haven't directed any questions at him. So if I'm not directing any
The
questions
board
at
is
him,
directing questions to
I'm
him.
going to instruct him not to answer anything.
This is the yes or no question. It is an email that he sent. Okay?
The board has the right to ask. It's an employment, not a criminal.
I understand.
The board has the right to ask him questions that relate to the employment with the town.
I understand that
He wrote
too.
an email, apparently,
Yes.
February
16th.
16th. To the board
Town administrator and CC'd all board members.
saying whatever she said.
I'm asking if he wrote this email, yes or no. Okay, then I'm going to continue to read the other questions that I have. that we have.
Let me finish with that. You know all about Garrity. You know about the Garrity warning and. So is he willing to sign that and testify here? I mean, I think this is his employee. His employee, is it?
Criminal investigation comes everything. Reported to the state
Okay.
that there's a criminal investigation pending and won't disclose.
Are you saying he's not willing to answer questions from his employer? It doesn't necessarily relate to criminal proceedings. No. No.
I believe the letters is right in here, so you have had access to it.
It doesn't change my analysis.
Please go to page 264. Please go to page 264, please. Thank you. And I will read this letter that is in this book. This is dated February 27th at 8:13 p.m. from Jim Sullivan to Karen Montgomery, Rick Perrian, Gary Madden, Lori Mahar, Diane Byer, CC Jim Sullivan as well. The entire board, other than Lori Mahar, did not receive this, but Karen forwarded it to us after Lori forwarded it to her. And I will read this. Administrator Montgomery, Vice Chair Tarian, Selectman Madden, Mahar, Tasker, and Chairman Byer. Chief Paul Poirier was reinstated as Chief of Police of the Barnstead Police Department on November 6, 2020. Chief Poirier has been on paid administrative leave because I and another officer acted as whistleblowers with complaints about Chief Poirier. Since the evening of Chief Poirier's return, he has made it a point to harass and target me as well as to create an ongoing hostile work environment for me to work in. I have brought this to the attention of Town Administrator Montgomery and the Board of Selectmen on multiple occasions to include my most recent documentation that I submitted to you on February 23rd, 2021. Because of Chief Paul Poirier's ongoing behavior towards me, I am requesting that you notify Chief Paul Poirier that I do not want him to have any direct communication with me in any way, shape, or form, to include through any Barnstead Police Department employee, regardless of rank or status. I am also requesting that you notify Chief Paul Poirier that because of his documented aggressive actions while around me, that he is no longer to be in my physical presence. The only way Chief Paul Poirier should be in my presence or have communication with me is if the town administrator and 3 Board of Selectmen members are present or are included in the communication. The town of Barnstead administration has an obligation to protect an employee from being targeted, harassed, and made to work in a hostile work environment. To date, this has not occurred, and by all accounts, the town administration has not taken me seriously, and in fact, has allowed the behaviors of Chief Paul Poirier towards me to continue. This has nothing to do with my having the authority or not to tell you what or what not to do, as stated in a previous email to me. It has everything to do with protecting me as an employee of your town and especially as a whistleblower. I look forward to receiving a copy of your email notification to Chief Paul Poirier regarding this entire matter. Detective Sergeant James P. Sullivan. Did you write this email, yes or no?
Direct my client.
Okay. Okay. An email dated March 5th, which I believe you turned over for the mediation.
Yes.
Okay. This is from the Select Board, dated March 5th. Dear Detective Sergeant Sullivan, in your recent email of March 3rd, you are now requesting that the town administrator schedule a meeting with herself, Chief Poirier, and yourself regarding the outside carrier vest. You further state that you've been experiencing symptoms and issues associated with a duty belt causing you to take sick days, even though this office and the town administrator have been requesting that you address this with the chief since it started. Your emails state that you will not communicate with the chief, even through other officers, regardless of rank, and that you do not want to be in the chief's presence. The police department cannot operate or function under these conditions. As such, we are unanimous in our decision that further action must be taken, which will require you to participate in mediation through an outside agency. The chief has agreed to mediation as well. Please inform the town administrator via email or phone by the end of the day, Wednesday, March 10th, of your availability this week and next week for mediation sessions. Did you refuse to attend mediation?
I'm directing
Yes
my
or no?
client not to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right.
So what is being presented is what is called a Garrity warning. And I'm not going to read the entire thing, but they can read it now. But it basically says, this is not a criminal investigation. This is an employer-employee matter. And it says, since this is an administrative employer-employee investigation and hearing, and any self-incriminating information you disclose will not be used against you in a court of law. That's the promise that the town is making. Anything you say tonight will not be used against you in a court of law. You are required to answer the questions fully, completely, and truthfully. If you refuse to answer the questions, or if you attempt to provide false, untrue, or erroneous information, this in and of itself would be a violation of the rules and regulations of the town of Barnstead and may result in the termination of your employment. So in short, there's a guarantee of not using anything he says tonight against him in a criminal context, but this is an employer-employee proceeding, and he can be required to answer questions.
This is a guarantee that the town of Barnstead won't use anything against him in a criminal context, correct?
That is correct.
So again, there's been an allegation tonight that he's under criminal investigation. We don't know by whom. We don't know what or by what agency, and we don't know what the subject matter is.
That's unrelated. So anyway, you had the choice to make, and this could be grounds in and of itself for termination. He refuses to answer questions of the employer. Your choice.
I'm sorry. My client is going to exercise his Fifth Amendment rights, and I do not believe that can be grounds for termination or the denial of his property rights.
And lastly, we have a letter dated March 24th. And it says the Barnstead Police Department is tasked with maintaining public order and safety, enforcement of the law, preventing, detecting, and investigating criminal activities, as well as many other functions that require every department employee to work together in order to accomplish this. Additionally, pursuant to RSA 105(2)(a), the police chief has the authority to direct and control all employees of the department in their normal course of duty. In our letter dated to you, March 2nd, we informed you that your emails indicated that you did not have any direct contact with the chief to include through any police department, regardless, police department employee, regardless of rank or status, nor could the chief be in your presence without the town administrator and 3 select board members are an impractical and unworkable way to run the department. It is also stated that you needed to work directly with the chief on a day-to-day basis. You are an essential part of the police department and vital to the force, and the department can't operate successfully without your cooperation. Unless you can work and communicate effectively with the subordinates, superior officers, and the chief, we are unsure of your future with the department. As such, you are to respond in writing or email to us of your willingness to work and communicate with all members of the police department no later than 4 p.m. Tuesday, March 30th, 2021. We also want to be clear that this has nothing to do with your Department of Labor claim or your FMLA claim, and you should not perceive this to be any form of retaliation. This was sent on March 25th at 3:41 p.m. From Karen Montgomery. It said, Jim attached, please find a letter from the Board of Selectmen. The signed copy has been mailed to you. On March 30th of 2021, at 11:55 a.m., Jim Sullivan forwarded it to Denise Sullivan. March 30th at 2:26 p.m., Jim Sullivan forwarded it to a J. Sullivan email. And then at 4 o'clock, exactly, on March 30th, Jim Sullivan forwarded it to Karen with no subject, it was blank. So there's no answer whatsoever. Did you send the email to Karen with no information? Okay. So I'm going to end the hearing. The board is going to deliberate. Not sure if we're going to have an answer tonight or next week. And thank you very much for your time. Meeting is over. Hearing is over. Motion to adjourn.
Board, any other board members have questions?
Second.
Any other?
Do any board members have any other questions?
We're not answering any questions. Is that correct, Attorney?
My client's not going to answer any questions. If there's something I can help with in terms of documents.